well, what if you could open your app and just you're feeling anxious, you could just queue for a group of anxiety, and there's like, there are 20 other people out there who are also feeling anxious in the same moment. We know it's happening. I mean, millions of people right now in the moment are feeling depressed or anxious.
Hi, I'm Dr. Chloe Carmichael, clinical psychologist and author of Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety, and of course, your host for the High Functioning Hotspot. Some of you may remember the singer Jewel from the 90s and early 2000s. She had some huge hits. She's still making music and has a great book as well. And she has gone ahead and actually partnered with another psychologist to start an online virtual reality mental health platform. And so, of course, I just had to learn more. So, in today's interview, I had the opportunity to sit down with her co founder. His name is Noah, and learn about this virtual reality mental health community. And it really is amazing. He actually showed me a video of it during the interview, and it really does look pretty incredible. I love, as a psychologist, seeing when people in my community step out of the box a little bit and are not afraid to cast a wider net and broaden the tent a little bit. And that is definitely what Noah and Jewel have done. So without further ado, I'm excited to share my interview with Noah Robinson. Noah, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. I just have to check and confirm. I believe I read that you are a clinical psychologist. Is that correct?
I am about 1 year away from graduating, so I'm technically a clinical psychology doctoral candidate right now.
Wow, that's amazing. So, if you don't mind sharing, I'm always curious when people, go to become a clinical psychologist. There's usually a story behind that. I don't mean to just jump right off here into the deep with you, but do you mind sharing what drew you to the field?
Sure. Yeah, so I am actually the youngest of four boys, and I think the first thing that drew me to clinical psychology is that my next oldest brother had a disease, meningitis, when he was a baby and was left with permanent brain damage. And so he has an intellectual disability. And basically, when I became around the age of 10, I started to notice that I was becoming his older brother. And so that was kind of the first experience that led me to be noticing that there's a difference between, what we see and what might be happening in the brain. And after that experience, kind of around that age, is when I really wanted to go into clinical psychology, and was just really interested in learning how to help people by talking to them and, understanding their psychological states. And then the other thing that really motivated me to pursue clinical psychology was my own personal background and history with my own mental health struggles. When I was 13, I realized I was gay and I became depressed. And I actually escaped into a virtual world. It's called RuneScape. It's similar to World of Warcraft, with like avatars and other people in the world and things like that. And I spent almost 10,000 hours living in that environment throughout my teenage years because I was depressed and anxious about the idea of coming out of the closet. And ultimately, that saved my life, but it also sucked me into this alternative reality. And after a long time, I felt comfortable coming out of the closet to my clan because I was an avatar and was anonymous and could connect with other people and felt more comfortable. And after coming out in the virtual world, I came out in the real world when I was 18. And that experience led me also to be very interested in pursuing clinical psychology with a focus on how can we build virtual environments that actually could help people instead of, being designed by psychologists to suck people in and, get those dopamine hits going to get them, dependent on using the game to feel social validation and reward. What if we could use similar principles, but actually help people come back to reality more empowered than they left it? So that combination of experiences with my brother and then also my own struggles as an adolescent, being suicidal and finding virtual worlds as a refuge, the combination of that is what led me to be interested in pursuing clinical psychology.
Wow, that's amazing. As you said, a lot of times we hear more the negative side about, the virtual world. And so you're trying to open and use those same principles to create something positive because you had some of that experience yourself. Do you mind sharing what how you got through that transition yourself from being kind of, as you said, a little bit isolated in this virtual world. And then was it, you said, the act of coming out online that somehow springboarded you into a real world where you felt more yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think throughout my adolescent years, I knew that there was something different about myself. I knew that I was gay. Like I knew that I wasn't attracted to women and I was attracted to men and things like that. But I was so ashamed and so anxious about coming out that I just escaped into this virtual world, and I could level skills and gain experience and go on quests. And I led a clan of 400 people. So I basically, it was kind of like a startup, basically, grouped. And especially, I would say in some ways it's harder than a startup, because getting 400 adolescents to do the same thing and be on the same page was even harder in some ways than starting a company. But basically it was a refuge. It was a place where I could have an identity where sexuality wasn't really a factor. And I felt more comfortable in this group, in this social group. And in the real world, I barely had any friends. I was failing my classes. I was waking up at like 3 a.m. each day just so that I could play RuneScape. And actually RuneScape is run escape put together, which is, I didn't even realize that after 10,000 hours until much later, that it was the words run and escape put together. So yeah, that experience really was, it was this simultaneously an escape and something that was helping me, cope with this horrible thing that was happening with my anxiety and depression. And I think also, that's what a lot of substance use. I've done some research in substance use, and we just published a paper on using our virtual world for substance use disorder. But really, any kind of maladaptive behavior, cutting, some eating disorders, substance use disorders, non-suicidal self-injury, things like that, are all these attempts, I think, for people to self-regulate and deal with their pain. And they kind of stumble into these maladaptive, self-regulatory tools. And that's what kind of RuneScape was for me. I was kind of using it as an escape. It was helping me avoid my pain, but it wasn't necessarily the healthiest way to do that. And yet coming out to my clan, I felt empowered. I was testing the grounds, and then I felt empowered to come out in the real world. And it really helped with that transformation. And once I made it, I really flourished. I really was able to I went to University of Maryland as an undergrad, and I really just, I remember wanting to come out before college because I wanted to be myself. I wanted to have that experience. And it was incredible. It was magical to have that first time of being social. And I even got a piercing in my ear, to try to tell everyone that I was gay and that, I just didn't want to be back in the closet. So yeah.
Huh. Yeah. So now, obviously, I can see the, personal reflection skills and empathy skills and things that, make a good psychologist. And then I see the story and the reasoning as to how you wanted to blend technology with psychology. I am curious how you came to have the technical chops to do this. I mean, are you the psychologist behind this as well as the technical chops, or did you outsource that part?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I knew I wanted to use technology in, psychology and build an app or something like that through our college. But before I started my PhD at Vanderbilt, I went to the National Institutes of Health as a postbac, and I was there for 2 years, and I got exposed to virtual reality. And virtual reality is incredible. I mean, when you put on a headset, it's so experiential to be transported to this other world. And I remember putting it on and experiencing, I was in a lab, but I put on the headset and then I was on a space station, and it was just absolutely incredible and transformed my whole environment. And, so I got really excited about that, bought my own headset, started going in, and I stumbled into social virtual reality, which were, worlds with avatars where I could talk to other people and be a part of those worlds. And so from then on, I just started learning how to build environments, virtual environments. And it's actually, building a virtual world is kind of like using Photoshop, where you can put the pieces together and then you can go in, except you can actually put on a headset and be in the thing that you just created. So there's a really cool kind of cycle there. But ultimately, I did need to hire full-time software engineers. That's actually why I started my company. In my first year of grad school, I worked with computer science undergrads at Vanderbilt, and we built an experiment and put it on an app store and collected data. But I realized that it really, to build something that's clinically effective, that feels smooth and good, like a product that people can use, and it helps people, what we're doing is pretty complex. And so that's what led me to start a company so that I could get the funding to hire full-time software engineers and, kind of lead the company to building the product that we have today with Innerworld.
Right. So I went onto the Innerworld website and, it looks pretty interesting. And if you could just help me understand, like, do people put on a VR headset when they then sign in? And then I saw that you have, for example, like these classes, like there was one going on called Icebreaker when I logged in. Obviously, I couldn't join into the group because I'm not a member of Innerworld. But I mean, if I had a login, would I put on a headset and then I would feel like I was actually in a room with everybody there?
Yeah, so the cool thing about Innerworld is that it works on any device. So you can go on a computer, on a phone, and it's kind of like playing a video game. But the basic idea is that these are group experiences, social experiences that are led by non-professionals. We call them guides. The literature refers to these folks also as lay therapists or peers, because a lot of them have lived experience. But we call them guides. And we train the guides to lead these groups that are, in a virtual world. You become an avatar, you can choose your outfit, you're anonymous, and attend groups, and people communicate with their voice, and they, navigate around the virtual world. And each class or group is on different topics, like you mentioned. So really, if you go to our website and see all the different classes and things, first you have to download our app on the computer or phone or a headset. And then, yeah, basically you log in, you start off in an offline home that's a safe space, and you can go to any of the events that are happening. And we have over 150 events every single week right now. And it's just growing from here. So people are able to come in, and I'm happy to talk more about kind of why we're utilizing guides instead of therapists. I think that's an interesting conversation as well. But that's kind of the overview of, what the experience is like. And then one other thing too is that you can also just hang out. There's just worlds where you can go in to a hiking trail or a meditation maze or a cool abstract world or a campfire, and just hang out and talk with people to get social support, even if it's not in a structured group led by a guide.
And when you say talk with them, do you mean like um, talk by chatting, by typing words, or is it vocal communication?
It's vocal communication. So I actually just published a paper last week, which is our first Innerworld peer-reviewed publication, which I'm really excited about. And in that paper, I created a figure that basically plots, on the x-axis is how anonymous a technology is, like how much anonymity we have, and on the y-axis is the sense of presence that we have. So how much do we feel like we're actually with one another? And so right now, for example, we're on a Zoom, and, we're seeing each other. So we're really not that anonymous because we see who, each other are. And the presence is okay. It's more than text chat, probably. It's more than a phone call because I see your facial, reactions, things like that. But if you think about something like text chat, for example, it's less presence and more anonymity, because you don't, when you're texting someone, you don't feel like you're with them, but you can be fully anonymous, or, if you have a username, things like that. And so the cool thing about virtual environments is that there's that sense of presence because everyone's an avatar in a shared spatial environment. So you kind of see other people represented, all that kind of stuff. But it's also very anonymous because you're not showing your real face and things like that. So people use voice chat to communicate, to have that sense of presence, while at the same time having that anonymity that something like text chat would typically confer. And that's part of what we see as one of the mechanisms that makes Innerworld effective, is that people open up more, and it's easier to open up in a group. And we know as therapists that when someone opens up and feels more comfortable doing that, especially in a group setting, and feels that acceptance of others and things like that, it creates such an incredible platform for learning evidence-based tools from cognitive behavioral intervention. So that's kind of the basic idea behind the fact that people are talking, but they're also behind these avatars, so they feel that sense of safety and anonymity, just like I did in RuneScape.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. So I would love to, if you want to share, I would love to learn about why you chose to use the guides. I mean, I can sort of imagine why, but I would love to hear. And I'm also curious, how many users you currently have.
Sure. So, in terms of guides, one of the things is that right now in the United States, for example, this is a bigger problem around the world, but in the United States alone, we are short about 500,000 therapists. So there's a huge demand, and there's not enough therapists out there who can help everyone who needs it. And if everybody who actually needs help sought help, we would be short 5 million therapists in the United States alone. And again, it's an even worse problem globally. And so part of the reason that we're training guides is that there's a growing area of literature and research that shows that non-professionals can actually be as effective as therapists for many, many folks. Not for everyone, and therapists are very important, and especially the more serious the mental illness. Oftentimes people do need therapy, and we have some of our Innerworld members are in therapy and they're coming into Innerworld as an additional support. But for a lot of people, it's possible for non-professional lay folks who we call guides, that with some training in how to do like motivational interviewing, asking open-ended questions, being non-judgmental, being supportive, and then teaching evidence-based tools of what we call cognitive behavioral immersion, which is a variant of cognitive behavioral therapy, the leading evidence-based modality for psychological intervention. By teaching the guides these basic tools and scaffolding on top of that our technology like artificial intelligence, we're able to create an atmosphere where these folks are able to lead groups. And once you are able to train everyday folks, I kind of compare it to, I mean, it's not the same as driving a taxi because it's a lot more complicated, obviously, in terms of we're talking about people's mental health and we need robust safety systems. But if we take a second and put that aside, if you think about Uber versus taxi drivers, the taxi medallion was keeping the cost of taxi rides pretty high, kind of how licensure right now is keeping the cost of therapy sessions really high, and it's inaccessible for a lot of people. And Uber came along and said, okay, well, there's a lot of other people who could also be driving cars, who could be doing this maybe for a little bit lower price, but also just more accessible. It became like you can just open your phone and order a ride. Well, what if you could open your app and just you're feeling anxious, you could just queue for a group of anxiety, and there's there are 20 other people out there who are also feeling anxious in the same moment. We know it's happening. I mean, millions of people right now in the moment are feeling depressed or anxious, and you could start off and do a group together. What if accessing a therapeutic intervention was as accessible as ordering an Uber? So that's the kind of direction that we're trying to head. And there are a lot of really important ethical and safety considerations that I'm happy to touch on that are, again, it's very different than only driving, a car from point A to point B. There's a lot of really important safety, topics, and this is people's mental health. But the basic idea is the same, where there are a lot more lay people out there who are empathetic, who are caring, and we've trained about 80 of them so far and have a wait list of hundreds of people who want to become guides. We're able to basically scale up a mental health intervention to get help to everybody who actually needs it. In terms of number of users, we've actually had over 85,000 downloads of our application. So we're just so excited because there are so many people out there who need help, and we're really trying to scale something that can truly help every single person who needs it without the bottleneck of access. And we can also refer people to therapy if they need that as well. So we're not trying to replace therapists or anything. That's where the metaphor of Uber kind of ends there, because we're not trying to replace taxi drivers or anything. We're trying to add a step in the system that's a lower level of care, easier to access, and then we can get people to therapists or inpatient or hospitalization if they need it. So that's kind of where we see ourselves and why we're utilizing guides instead of therapists, where there's that kind of lack of the workforce, basically a supply problem on the therapy side.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. I can understand that. I mean, you probably know the study better than I do. I'm sure you're more familiar with this literature, but I'm thinking of a study about the Therapeutic Alliance being actually for, as you said, people who are not suffering from severe mental illnesses, but who have mild to moderate mental illnesses, that the Therapeutic Alliance was actually a stronger predictor of a positive outcome, a stronger predictor than even the modality of therapy that was
Yes.
being used. And for people who don't know, the Therapeutic Alliance is essentially the bond of the relationship that you have with the client. So I think the three main components are mutual agreement on what the goals are, mutual belief that these goals are attainable, and rapport. So essentially, as you said, it's not really necessarily for someone that has a severe and persistent mental illness, but for many people that are struggling with mild to moderate symptoms, just having a really good, strong relationship with somebody who's a positive force in your life can sometimes be more important than any specific therapeutic intervention that that person might be using.
Yeah, it's so funny because right now in our app we can send out emojis, and I love we have the 100 emoji, the 100, and if we were in there, I'd be sending those out as you were talking because yes, it's Pim Kuipers has a really good paper on this as well, and they refer to it I think as non-specific effects as well, which is the therapeutic alliance, which are these things that they're kind of difficult to measure, but it's these abstract concepts that are really important, like that interpersonal connection and rapport and that sense of connection that we feel accounts for over half of the outcomes of therapy. And so if we can reproduce that with these, lay professionals, these guides, and we can add on top of that the tools that are evidence-based and science-backed, I think it can really get us a lot of the way there for many people who are suffering from depression or anxiety and other kinds of mental health struggles.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of self-help. In fact, with my book, it's Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety. Part of the reason that I wrote the book is because with anxiety specifically, self-help has been shown to be, very effective for people with anxiety because that tendency of, double checking and completing directions and attention to detail, they apply all of that in the self environment and it can be really good for them. I've also been a big fan of things like BetterHelp and, Talkspace, these types of online interventions where people can get, support on demand. I personally think all of that is really good. I'm just a big fan of giving people the tools. And then if they have the capability that they may be able to use it themselves, and it can even be more empowering, I think, with their self-efficacy and their sense of control, fighting feelings of helplessness, that they're not even dependent upon some particular therapist or something like that. So I just wanted to preface my question with everything I just said because I want you to know I'm truly a big fan. However, I personally have encountered sometimes a fair amount of pushback from, people that maybe, in my view, can not really quite take the perspective that you and I are taking here. And it can feel sometimes as if they want to be gatekeepers, to that, as you said, the medallion, the taxi drivers with their medallions, they were actually not very happy about Uber,
Yeah.
just like the hotel industry was not very happy about Airbnb. And so I'm wondering if you experienced negativity or pushback from within our very own psychology community. How did you deal with that on an intellectual level? And how did you deal with it on a personal level?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. You know, I think, well, first, I just want to respond. It's interesting about these things like BetterHelp and Talkspace, because when we think about this problem, the supply problem that we have of therapists, good therapists generally are able to have a private practice because of the demand that there is for psychological intervention. And so the platforms like BetterHelp and Talkspace that often take a huge percentage of the revenue, because therapists, by the way, are in business, they're for profit, they're, trying to make money, and they're also helping people as a profession. And so you end up on these platforms, a lot of people have negative experiences as well with the providers on these platforms because sometimes they're newer therapists or they're not as trained, or they're just kind of every session they might just be talking and they're not actually bringing in tools. It's just kind of like checking in every week, those non-specific effects, but you're not getting that extra, half of what makes therapy work with the tools and things. So it's interesting because technology so far has tried to solve the problem of mental health access, but really it's just kind of It's increased access, but it hasn't necessarily increased access to effective and evidence-based mental health intervention. It's increased access to some therapists, but they're not necessarily the most effective therapists, which I think is interesting. And again, I hope anyone listening, I think there's great therapists in all these platforms. It's possible to find them. I always worry about the folks who try one of the platforms, they try one therapist, they pay, it doesn't work well, and then they think, oh, therapy isn't for me, and then it kind of like they don't continue that search because they're discouraged. But yeah, coming back to the kind of elements of what we're doing. I mean, I almost got kicked out of Vanderbilt, actually. In my first year of grad school, I got accepted to Vanderbilt to work with someone who left, but I wanted to stay at Vanderbilt. And so I had a mentor who basically didn't support what I was doing. He thought that it wasn't traditional. I shouldn't be doing it. And he said, you should go do computer science, and basically I almost got kicked out. And my current mentor, Steve Holland, who's a protege of Aaron Beck, who created cognitive behavioral therapy, saw what I was doing. And he's the most senior person in our department, but he saw what I was doing and saw the need for scalable mental health interventions and took me under his wing. He hadn't had a student in 15 years, but he took me under his wing and has mentored me and really allowed this to grow and flourish. So having his support has been a really important component. And because he's, a famous clinical psychologist. And then also, I think we are doing this from within the community. I think a big difference between Innerworld as a startup and a company and most other mental health startups and companies is that I'm the founder and CEO, and I'm also hopefully about to be a clinical psychologist in the next year or so. So we really are trying to be diligent about data collection, testing what we're doing. We're using all the validated clinical measures that a clinic might use, like the PHQ-9 to track depression or the GAD-7 to track anxiety. We're publishing a paper showing significant decreases in those symptoms of depression and anxiety for folks who are using our platform. We're hopefully about to get a grant to do a randomized control trial as well, testing the efficacy of what we're doing. So I think it's really important that I don't think the strategy of Uber or Airbnb, where you just deploy it, ignore the regulation, and get lots of people using it, I don't think that will work for a mental health intervention and scalable platform. I do think we have to work within the system to some extent in terms of collecting evidence and making sure what we're doing works. However, at the same time, we don't have to use every component of the system. We don't have to have necessarily licensed therapists as long as we don't make claims that we're treating anything, which we make sure, there's a disclaimer when you actually come into Innerworld that we're not therapy, we're not crisis intervention. We really make sure people know that. And the other part of the system that we aren't utilizing is the health insurance system, because that's kind of broken right now too. And a lot of the digital mental health startups are focused on things like digital therapeutics, where they want an app to be prescribed, that you have to go to a psychiatrist and get a prescription for those anxiety self-help apps. And then they can charge, the company can charge a health provider or health insurance company, $4,000 a month to provide like a basic CBT app. It's completely, I don't think it works. And actually Pear Therapeutics, one of the largest, I was on an advisory board for them for just a little bit. And they were the first prescription digital therapeutic. They just folded. They just, the company has basically failed because it turns out that a way to solve the mental health crisis isn't through making everyone have to get a prescription for an app kind of thing. So I think there's elements of the system that we need to make sure we're incorporating. And I think those most important ones are the ethical elements of, what is the American Psychological Association what are the set of ethical guidelines that they have, and how can we take those and translate them to non-professional individuals and make sure that we're doing things in an ethical way? What do things like dual relationships look like for non-professionals who come into a community as end users and then become a guide? Can they have existing relationships, outside of those sessions and things? There's so many ethical questions that we do want to use, the system and the professional guild to make sure we're answering these, testing the efficacy, things like that. So yeah, I think it's been you really keyed in on an interesting kind of balance that we're trying to strike, where we are trying to scale, make something accessible, and we're still trying to go through and, collect the data, be science-based, and make sure we apply the ethical guidelines in the best way possible.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's a different worlds that you're straddling, in so many different ways. And, again, as clinicians, we know that social support is so important for people's resiliency and their mental health. And in a way, it almost feels like what you're doing with Innerworld is a bit of a hybrid. It's almost like a ultra strong social support network where there's this extreme emphasis on mental fitness and mental wellness, and you have guides there that are trained with knowledge that they're sharing with people. But at the same time, it's ultimately a peer-to-peer situation. And so there is, it seems tilted on the social side, which is actually, again, pretty cool. It's where a lot of people are going online right now anyway. They're going to social media where they're getting, God knows what sometimes from, different people that are hanging out a shingle, online. And so with Innerworld, it feels like you're really truly creating a community that offers that feeling of support. And the fact that the guides are actually peers, I know you said the reason was in part because of a supply issue, but I actually think as well that there's something about learning from your peers that makes something feel even more accessible and even more relatable, that you say, well, this person was sitting in my shoes 6 months ago, and look, here they are now. It makes people, I think, on some level feel like this is more relatable. So I know that we don't have all day, so I did just have one more pressing question. I almost, of course, have to ask the obvious. How on earth did you come to partner with Jewel in all of this? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, it's really exciting. So Jewel has an incredible history and background where, she went through her own mental health struggles as an adolescent. And unlike me, where I got sucked into this video game and was kind of distracted in that experience, she used introspection and reflection to develop her own tools to help her get through that situation. It was absolutely incredible and really powerful. And she went on to, I mean, she had an incredible music career and still does, and is releasing new music. And she also co-founded a foundation 22 years ago called the Inspiring Children Foundation, where they actually teach evidence-based mental health tools. They're not necessarily the same as CBT, but they're basically variants of that, where they, instead of cognitive distortions, they might call it your list of lies and things like that. And for 22 years, they've been helping adolescents overcome their mental health issues with no therapists in their group. This is an in-person experience where adolescents come to live and thrive in an incredible setting. And she wanted to bring that into virtual worlds because she saw that, she thought that avatars in virtual worlds could be a really, really powerful way to scale, what they were doing with their peer-based mental health intervention. Because all the people delivering the intervention in this program are folks who went through it. So that's really this peer-based program. And she decided she was going to build her own platform with avatars and virtual worlds. And during her due diligence process, she wanted to see would she be the first one to do this? And she found Innerworld and me and what we were doing. And, we met, and, I read her book called Never Broken. That's absolutely incredible. That talks about the journey that she went through, which very few people, I mean, it really reminded me of Marshall Linehan, who created dialectical behavioral therapy, or some other, like, I mean, Aaron Beck also through his own experiences was reflecting and kind of came up with CBT, and other psychologists have done this too. So it's very rare for someone to be able to come up with tools like that. And she found Innerworld, we connected, and really we have the same exact vision and goal. And she joined as a co-founder about a year ago. And it's been absolutely incredible and she's also our chief strategy officer. So she's helping us strategize and how can we scale effectively and make sure what we're doing can reach everybody who needs it. So she's a brilliant business person, entrepreneur, and just really grateful to have her in the company.
Yes. I mean, do you like provide her book to users or anything like that?
We don't currently provide our book to users, but that's a very good idea that I would love to explore with her because it's called Never Broken. It's absolutely incredible. It's a really incredible.
Yeah, I've actually seen it. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of her work. I actually as well was an emancipated minor and left my home when I was 15 and all these things. And I'm on the advisory board of Women's Health magazine, which is how I was able to, get in touch through this because of her recent feature there. So, I would certainly love to send you guys a copy of my book as well, in case you guys ever decide you want to host book clubs or, anything along those lines. But I do understand that you have a video that you want to share. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd love to share my screen and share this video because I can talk about Innerworld and how it's affecting folks, but I'd much, much rather just share this because you can see and hear from folks who've actually had their lives changed. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share this video. It's just about 3.5 minutes, but hopefully the listeners can kind of get a sense of the experiences that people are having in the platform. And
Awesome.
all right, I'm going to go ahead and do it.
I'm a person that I live alone. I don't have a partner. I don't have kids.
I've been on the road to recovery for quite some time now.
Being bipolar, ADHD, and anxiety.
I have really bad anxiety.
Autistic, ADHD, anxiety, social anxiety, mobility issues, heart and lung disease. I have all those diagnoses.
I joined Innerworld last week, and my biggest struggle is that I have not left the house alone in 6 years. And just in the past several days attending meetings, I actually had the courage today, thanks to the support that I received from this group. I left the house by myself for the first time today in 6 years.
Having been a 13-year combat veteran, having some struggles of my own, it's hard to relate with people in the civilian sector, and mental health is a crisis throughout our veterans. The VA struggles to maintain a mental health platform that can help everyone in its system. When I came here to Innerworld, everybody's very friendly, very accepting, very non-judgmental, and I found a good place for me to share my experiences. Becoming part of a family is what veterans like, and that's what they're looking for, and I think they would definitely enjoy this platform if they knew about it some more.
So I'm a stay-at-home mom of 5 very young kids. The past couple years have been really tumultuous, and they were really traumatic, involving a really complex and high-risk twin pregnancy. I found myself drowning in postpartum depression and anxiety constantly. I started feeling downright desperate, and honestly, I was feeling really hopeless, like I had nowhere to go. It was like one minute I was alone on a deserted island of hopelessness, and before I knew it, my island stretched out into a peninsula of people that were standing there with welcoming arms wide open. I don't know how else to explain how I ended up here, besides it being a literal divine intervention for me.
I don't currently own a VR headset. I went through a really bad breakup last weekend. I moved across the US to be with the person I was with. I don't know anyone here. I decided I was going to download it and see what it was about. I attended my first meeting that night, and just that one meeting made me feel so much better. Just being able to talk to the people here, hearing everyone else's stories, it's really changed and helped me a lot, even though I'm still going through a lot of emotion. It's really helped having this place to come to.
I grew up in an abusive home, and I left home at 16 as a high school dropout and got married and learned how to survive. And the whole time when I was younger, I was alone most of my life. I kind of had to fend for myself and figure things out. Eventually got involved in behavioral health. I've been in it for about 17 years. And my oldest daughter, who had autism, committed suicide 8 years ago. The thing is, the people that are giving those support end up the ones that don't have a support system in the end. And so when I came here, I felt supported for one of the first times in my life.
Wow,
So
that
those
is
are
so cool. I
yeah.
mean, for anyone who's just listening to the podcast and is not seeing the video, It was super cool. It was like these little avatars and they were all sitting around a fire and they were sharing, and I love that combination, Noah, that you described of having an avatar paired with their actual human voice. It's really a neat, blend. And I think another benefit actually to this setup that I hadn't really thought of until I just really saw it is I think it's probably also good for the members' own sense of self-efficacy and self-worth to realize that their own presence helps other people, that
Yes.
their own supportiveness is empowering to others. I mean, so they give and receive support.
Yeah, I think it's so powerful that not only can folks get help, but you can give it too. And it's the way that we can scale because, so many of the people who shared stories are now interested in becoming guides. And that's how we can scale the kind of see one, do one, teach one model where folks come in with a problem, they get help, and then they realize, wow, I can tap into this whole sorts of meaning and purpose in my life and help transform the lives of others. Even Roxanne, who started the anonymous username Roxanne, who hadn't left her house alone in 6 years. And after 1 week, was going out, which is just such a fast turnaround. She was helped by another member that we have, Moon Goddess, who hadn't left her house at all, even to go to the mailbox in 4 years. And she was in therapy, but not till she came to Innerworld was she able to learn the fear form, basically the worst case, best case, most likely scenario. She used that, she practiced it, and then she started going out of the house for the first time, bringing Innerworld with her on her phone, and she went to the grocery store and logged into Innerworld, and everyone was there cheering her on to go into the grocery store for the first time. And she became a guide and helped Roxanne, who was in this video, leave her house. So it's just this kind of, one of our members called it viral healing. And that's really what we're trying to create here, is that scalability so that we can really help every single person who needs it.
Yes, that's so cool. So, I mean, again, it's called Innerworld, and Noah Robinson, thank you so much for sharing about this. Is there anything that I have not asked you about that you wanted to share?
Yeah, there's two things I'd like to touch on real quickly. One is that we did start Innerworld 18 and above, and we now have a 13 to 17-year-old version of it with completely separate servers so that adolescents cannot interact with adults. They can only interact with our guides, and they can only interact with each other when a guide is online in the same world and can hear what they're saying. So it's a very closely supervised experience. And the other thing is I just wanted to touch on the importance of safety. I mentioned before that we have consents in our app about the fact this is not therapy, it's not crisis intervention. We have crisis resources that we can pull up at any time. We have a 24/7 safety team that can be paged by our guides or by our AI-based system in case it detects something like suicide or curse words or like trolling and things like that. And then we also have 24/7, we have someone online in the hub, which is kind of our central area, greeting people and kind of screening them a little bit to make sure that they're not trolls. So we really take, with the anonymity comes the kind of price tag of folks feeling more comfortable being mean sometimes to each other. And so we really pride ourselves in our, robust safety systems that we built over 4 years of beta testing to make sure that we are catching trolls and other kind of folks often within about 30 seconds of them, coming in and being mean and things like that. Because I think it's so important to, if we're going to have something that is helping people with their mental health, we need to protect the community and the culture to make sure that we can scale and grow and keep that empathy and viral healing going. So I'm just really proud of our engineering team and community, and Jewel as well, who's been helping to design these systems to make sure that we can create a safe space for as many people as possible.
That is so cool. I love the idea of a greeter person that not only, screens people, but also I just imagine what a warm and welcoming experience that is, that, your first point of contact is a real life person who's just noticing you and seeing you and ushering you in. I mean, how amazing is that? So Noah, cheers to you and to
Thank you.
Jewel for bringing this to the world. And I'm happy to share about it as well. So Innerworld, it really sounds special.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. Thanks again. Take care. Bye.